Hey everybody, and welcome to Module 1. This week's lecture is based on Chapter 1 of the textbook, Library Programs and Services, The Fundamentals, by Greenwell and Evans. It's a very broad overview and does not represent the entire content of the chapter. So my lectures are not meant to replace the chapter, but to highlight the interesting and important ideas. So even if you don't have access to the textbook, the concepts highlighted in this lecture will inform you on a very basic introduction to public services. I think this chapter does a good job of highlighting why public libraries exist, how they've changed over time, why they are not obsolete, and how we continue to remain relevant. So there's a quote on the very first page of our textbook that sums up library services very nicely. Libraries are one of the most important community institutions because they express our enduring commitment to education, culture, family, basic human freedoms, and historic preservation. Even during trying fiscal times, let's never forget that our taxpayer investment in libraries is an invaluable investment in education and lifelong learning. Everything we do as public librarians points back to this statement. All the programs, the collections, technology, everything we do for our patrons comes back to this statement. One of my public library pet peeves is calling our services free. This quote from Barot's reminds us that library services are a taxpayer investment. They pay for everything we make available to them, including ourselves. So calling library services free is a disservice to them. It discredits what they have invested in, and it undervalues what we have to offer. Here's another quote from page 9 of our textbook. Everything a library does has some type of cost associated with it, be it time, space, or money. The challenge lies in trying to decide what should be free to the users and what should carry some cost, and deciding what the user's share should be. Even when there is a fee, libraries rarely recover the full costs associated with the service provided. The balancing of costs and service is always a challenging process." End quote. Patrons generally expect to pay for extra things like printouts or photocopies, logo bags, headphones, maybe late fees. Many of those things are revenue lines for libraries, but even so, they generally make up a very, very small percentage of the library's annual operating budget. So many libraries are going fine-free now because it doesn't largely affect their budget to go fine-free. Late fees generally account for less than 1% of annual operating budgets. For very small, very underfunded libraries, that 1% could be a crucial bit that they can't do without. But for others, it is entirely negligible and not worth the negative public relations and the inequities that late fees create. All of this is to say that even when libraries charge fees for certain services, they rarely recover their full costs. Deciding what is the cost of doing business and what can reasonably be passed on to the taxpayer is challenging because a library has to figure out what the core services are that they must provide with the funding they receive from taxpayers, and what the extra accessory services they maybe provide for convenience, but they have to pass on those costs to the patron. So how do we remind patrons of the value of libraries without appearing too commercial, and emphasizing that there's no extra cost to use the library? One way is to use the ALA's Library Value Calculator, and there are other tools and calculators that do this too. There are add-ons to your library's ILS, their integrated library system, that can be added on to do this. It simply uses the cost data in the title record to add up what it would have cost patrons if they had purchased those items instead of checking them out. And there's an example on the screen here of a date due receipt that gives that information. I love those. Another way is to introduce all of your programs by thanking the taxpayers or the friends of the library or whoever paid for the program for sponsoring the event. I think the word sponsor indicates that there was a benefactor. I always introduce my programs with a thank you to the Friends of the Library. And I also thank folks for shopping our ongoing used book sale, which is actually located right outside of our meeting rooms, to let them know that those sales fund programs like this. Our print newsletter and our website also have verbiage like sponsored by or funded by or a service to taxpayers, just to remind people that these services are not free, they do have value, and somebody, possibly even them, the taxpayers, funded those services. So let's move on and talk about service quality. All of the services public libraries provide are intended to achieve outcomes like those you see on the screen here. Again, all of the programs, collections, the technology, the facilities that we provide are best received by patrons when they are focused on the user's needs and interests. We don't provide services because they're cool or they're fun or they're interesting. We provide them because our patrons have a genuine interest or a need for them. The assessment module will go into more depth about how to find out who your patrons are demographically and what their actual needs may be. We also provide access to information in a variety of formats. We maintain broad access to service for all people equitably. We make decisions in the most socially responsible way we can, whether that's sustainability, equitability, or inclusiveness. Going back to the quote from Barot's back on that first slide, we have, quote, an enduring commitment to basic human freedoms, end quote. That requires social responsibility. In order to do any of these things well, we need community input. Change, can be needed and appropriate and welcomed, or it can be changed for the sake of change. We need the community's input for effective change. So this bullet pointed list here are service that leads to quality outcomes, is focused on users' interests and needs. It provides access in a variety of formats, maintains the broadest possible access to services, functions in a socially responsible manner, and solicits community input to service changes. That list is on page 2 of the textbook. The role of libraries in society has changed greatly over time. When print books were expensive and took a long time to produce, libraries were meant to preserve and give access to these valuable, rare items to, the people who needed them, the scholars of society. Not just anyone could access them. They were too valuable. As the printing press made print material easier to access and reproduce, and also as literacy became more important to daily life of average citizens, libraries changed and adapted. They became more open. Their services turned more toward education, culture, historic preservation. Now the print material is available at a rate that no one can feasibly keep up with, and it's freely shared online. Libraries have turned more now toward curating and evaluating information and helping people access information in different formats and helping people evaluate which information to use as well, because there's so much out there. Technology has made information both more available and less widely accessible, as it requires connectivity and devices and skill sets that everyone does not have. So libraries are continuing to change even now as we add more social services like social workers on staff or refuge and relief for those experiencing homelessness and poverty. And also as we adapt our spaces to accommodate mobile offices for remote workers or maybe group work spaces for collaborative projects. The 2 quotes on the slide sum up this idea of library adaptability. The first one is, those who predict the demise of libraries have a lack of understanding of libraries' adaptability, their ability to respond to change, and the important role libraries play in society. The second quote here says, the role we play in supporting the learning, discovery, and information needs of our clientele have changed. Customer service and service quality. Quality service reduces the gap between expectations and needs. Gap analysis looks at the gap between patron expectations and their perceptions about the library and its services. So what does the community expect the library to offer, and what does the library actually offer? Better quality service results in higher levels of customer satisfaction, and people remember the experience, not the outcome. Quality service identifies needs that are both wanted and demanded. The best quality service does those things. There are 10 dimensions of service quality, and I've listed the authors of that study. It's an older study, but the 10 dimensions of service quality are still completely relevant today. People have different expectations for each dimension. They are tangibles, reliability, responsiveness, courtesy, empathy, competence, security, access, communication, and understanding the customer. Positive library experiences are the goal. We want our patrons to not just be satisfied, but delighted and impressed by how they were treated. This can come from the professionalism and knowledge of the staff, so how the outcome was achieved. It can be the comfort and the cleanliness of the facility. Those are tangibles. The working and useful technology. It's not just technology that exists in theory, but it actually creates efficiency. It actually works. The generosity and the attention that they received. So those are ways that those 10 dimensions of service quality create positive library experiences. So in conclusion, you can already tell I like shorter lectures that get to the point, that serve a purpose, that don't just have me rambling on for an hour. The modules of this class are always filled with lots of links and webinars and for articles for further exploration and things like that. So that's it for this week. In conclusion, libraries are a taxpayer investment. They are not free. Quality outcomes are achieved when user-focused information is provided in a variety of formats, made widely accessible in socially responsible ways, and changed with patron input. Libraries have and will continue to adapt according to the needs of society. And lastly, customer service drives quality outcomes. Have a great week, everybody.